Hello, fellow travelers. I am Dr. Richard Hector. Welcome to episode 5 of Soucouyant, a Caribbean supernatural tale, where we reimagine the Soucouyant, a character from the folklore of the Caribbean. Here, we follow her as she is depicted in Trinidad. Her depiction might be different in other places in the Caribbean. In episode 4, we saw the Soucouyant and Irons survey flats lying under the bridge. We also saw hints of a softer side of Soucouyant. It was a hint of humanity. In this episode, the police and ambulance arrived to take flats to Casualty, as it's called in Trinidad and Tobago, or the emergency room. We saw flats laying under the bridge, and Irons and Soucouyant decided he was alive. Now, in episode 5, they walked out from under the bridge. The day was clearing. Greens and browns were emerging from the grays of dawn. They stood listening to the soft gurgling of the stream and the chirping of birds. Roosters were crowing in the distance, and faint sounds of people starting the day reached their ears. "It's nice to stand here quietly and listen to the sound of the village waking up," said Vashti. "Yes, it is," he agreed. Vashti continued holding his arm. He was relaxed and comfortable with her presence. After a short while, his phone chirped. He answered and directed the ambulance to the bridge. While talking, he started ascending the embankment with Vashti in tow. She held out her hand and he pulled her up. The ambulance slowed to a stop on the bridge. Not far behind the ambulance was a police patrol car with the blue light flashing, but no siren. It stopped behind the ambulance and two officers got out. They were both in uniforms, gray shirts with silver metal buttons and navy blue trousers. They donned their uniform hats as they got out. One was tall and slim, of African descent. The other was older and rounder, of Indian descent. The older policeman had two chevrons on his shoulders, indicating he was the rank of corporal. The other policeman's sleeves were bare. They were both unarmed. The attendants were standing by the side of the ambulance. The policeman nodded to them while walking towards Irons and Vashti. "Good morning, everybody," said the corporal. "Good morning, Corporal," John and Vashti replied together. "Mr. Walcott," the corporal consulted his notepad. "You found the victim?" asked the corporal. "Yes, Corporal," replied Irons. "He's under the bridge, yes?" said the corporal. "Yes, Corporal, under the bridge." "Let's go look at him and see what we can see." He beckoned to the medical team. "Bring your stretcher and equipment." John led the way down the embankment. He was followed by the policemen and ambulance attendants. Vashti came down at the rear and remained in the background. The corporal held up his hand and took out a flashlight that he used to examine the corners that were still in shadow. Apparently satisfied that no weapons were in the vicinity, he stepped to one side and led the stretcher and attendants through. He spoke to the constable, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I see there was a fight, but no weapon was used on him. We will see if we can find any when we do a thorough examination of the area. I can't determine the size of the assailant because the witnesses' footprints disrupted any others that might have been here. I'm only finding 2 sets of male prints." He scrutinized the footprints with his flashlight. He tried to make it appear accidental as he passed the beam over the work boots worn by Irons and Vashti's shoes. He kept talking. "And 1 set of female that must belong to the young lady. I expected to find another set of male footprints belonging to the man that beat him up." He smiled quickly at John and Vashti. "But you folks did the right thing by making sure he was alive. It's much better to investigate a fight with a live person and poor evidence than a dead person and clear evidence." The constable nodded and grunted an agreement. John smiled and nodded. Vashti smiled while looking at the corporal approvingly. She decided that she met at least 2 good men that morning. The corporal turned back to the attendants. "What do we have here, gentlemen? Will he survive?" "Yes, he will, if we act quickly. I don't find any broken bones or big wounds, but his pulse is rapid and weak due to loss of blood. He lost a lot of blood." The more senior of the 2 attendants reported. The corporal was startled. He walked over quickly and bent over looking at the victim. What do you mean by lost a lot of blood? Demanded the corporal. Taking out his flashlight, he directed the beam down the length of the bridge and back along the edge of the river. I don't see any large wounds and I can't see any blood on the ground. Those clothes over there look like his, but he didn't appear to have been in the water for the blood to wash away. How could he have lost a lot of blood? The attendant compressed his looks with a puzzled look on his face that creased his forehead and furrowed his brow, still holding flats at the wrist while looking at the corporal. I can't explain it, Corporal. We need to get him up the hill and started on IV fluids right away. He doesn't have a lot of time, said the medical technician. So you won't try to explain why he lost a lot of blood? Not won't, can't. I just deal with what I find, Corporal. After he's stabilized and regains his senses, you can ask him. Hmm, very logical. We will clear out and give you room to do your work. Thank you, Corporal, said the attendant and turned to his colleague. Let us get him on the stretcher. After we put him on the stretcher, you can run up and prepare 1,000 mm, 0.9% NSS. That should be enough by the time we reach Casualty. I don't understand the reason he's so out of it, unconscious. He's in shock from the loss of blood. His shock seems not so bad. Let's hurry up and get him to the hospital where the doctors can handle this mystery. One of these men can help me carry the stretcher, he said, looking at the corporal who nodded. Vashti smiled at being discounted. Even in her human form, she was stronger than any of the men. Sounds good, replied the younger attendant, as he moved to position himself at the other end of the stretcher, and they made preparations to place flats on it. The corporal turned to John and Vashti. Let's go up. The constable will help them bring the victim up to the ambulance. Okay, constable? Yes, sir, corporal. I can help also, volunteered John. Good man, thanks, said the corporal. I told him this morning that he is a good man, said Vashti. Before anyone could reply, the most senior attendant counted. Then both attendants lifted flats quickly and gently onto the stretcher, using the corners of a sheet on which they had rolled him. The younger attendant left to set up the ambulance and prepare the IV. The other nodded at the corporal. Okay, lifters, help them take the victim up to the ambulance. The young lady and I will get out of the way. The corporal stepped out of the way, protecting Vashti with his outstretched arm. She smiled and allowed herself to be guided to the edge of the path. The younger attendant nodded as he quickly passed by and ran up the embankment. The corporal and Vashti followed him. By the time the lifters got up the embankment with a stretcher, the ambulance was open and the attendant had the IV fluid prepared. They placed flats in the ambulance and asked the corporal if they could leave the scene. The corporal promptly gave consent and they sped off to the hospital without a further word. The corporal turned to John and Vashti. You two did a good thing this morning, a great thing. You may have saved a man's life, he said. John did all the work, said Vashti. Are you sure he will live? It's out of our hands, ma'am. It's up to the Heavenly Father now, said the corporal. And the ambulance driver, Irons, interjected. Well, yes, you're right, Mr. Walcott. Anyway, I don't get an opportunity like this often. Thank you, both of you. An opportunity like what? Asked Vashti. The opportunity to thank civilians, ma'am. People just don't seem to go out of their way to help these days. He seemed pleased but slightly uncomfortable. He changed the subject. I might need to get in touch with you in case I have to double-check details in your statement, Mr. Walcott. We have your phone number. Young lady, he said, turning to Vashti, I don't have any contact information for you. What's your name? Vashti. Vashti Ramkilawan. Normal spelling? What do you mean, normal spelling? How many ways can you spell Ramkilawan? She joked. Well, ma'am, with you modern Indian these days, I find all kinds of spelling. You're not a modern Indian, Corporal? No, ma'am. I'm an old-fashioned Indian from Monkey Town, Barrackpore. Are there a lot of monkey towns? Why did you say Barrackpore? No. I think we only have one monkey town in the whole of Trinidad and Tobago. Constable, you know another monkey town? No, Corporal, just yours in Barrackpore. The corporal turned back to Vashti and continued. Nobody knows Monkey Town. Folks mostly know about Barrackpore. That's the reason I always add Barakpur. Oh, I see. So what's the normal spelling in Monkey Tongue Barakpur? Asked Vashti. Ramkilawan is how we spell it, ma'am, the corporal replied. Ram Ki La Wan. So if I spell it like that, does it make me a modern Indian or an old-fashioned Indian? Just a normal Indian, ma'am. Good. I'm glad to be normal. They smiled at each other. Under all the old talk, nice as it is, what's your contact information? Actually, Corporal, I move along a lot. I have relatives in different places that I spend time with, so it will be easier if I contact you. Well, I understand that, said the corporal. Other than Barakpur, I have family in San Fernando, Cuba, Chaguanas, El Socorro, and St. James. I even have a cousin that marry and follow her husband to Mount St. George and Tobago. He turned to the constable. You remember my cousin Shirma? Yes, Corporal. She is a civil engineer. I was at the wedding. I didn't know she lives in Tobago now, replied the constable. He recognized that the corporal was baiting a trap to catch the witness off guard. They have elicited inconsistency in witnesses using this gambit. The corporal engaged in conversation. However, he did not know which gambit the corporal would use. He remained alert for the subtle signals. Yeah, they moved to Tobago. She and her husband did some work on the Scarborough airport and fall in love with the place, so they decided to move to Tobago. That's good. She followed him or he followed her? Asked the constable. To tell the truth, I don't know who followed whom. One followed the other. He turned back to Vashti. Anyway, ma'am, you said the victim was naked when you found him? The constable saw the trap fly. He began walking back to the car while his attention was on the exchange. No, Corporal, I didn't say that. John said the victim was naked when John found him. She emphasized the John. The prey evaded the trap.